Hi, my name is Raquel Bradley, and I'm here to talk to you today about coffee. Now, you're probably wondering, what does coffee have to do with chemical engineering, let alone modern technology? Well, I'll explain that later. But right now, I can tell you that it has a huge impact on society. Here are some statistics by the National Coffee Association. They do a study every single year since 1950 called the National Coffee Drinking Trends Study. Now, according to this, Americans spend in excess of $40 billion a year on coffee. And half of Americans over 18 drink coffee every day. Of those people that drink coffee every day, 10% are drinking decaf. Let me say that again. 10% of people who have coffee every day drink decaf. Now, if there's approximately 300 million Americans, that means there's 15 million Americans that drink coffee every day. And according to the New York Times, these numbers can be larger for certain small-scale roasters and coffee houses. So, how do engineers meet this market requirement? Unfortunately, coffee doesn't grow decaffeinated. The coffee bean, originally, the green coffee bean comes from the cherry from the coffea plant, and it naturally comes with caffeine inside it. So, what do? You decaffeinate it through chemical processes. This is where the technology part comes in. There are currently 4 methods used today in industry: solvent-based, in which through direct and indirect methods, and water-based. The common solvents for the solvent-based method includes methylene chloride and ethyl acetate, which is actually found naturally in fruits. So the cool thing about these solvents is that they have a low vaporization temperature, which means that they could pretty much be non-existent by the time you're drinking your decaf coffee. Another great solvent to use is supercritical CO2, which I'll explain a little bit more later. Swiss water method is one of the newest, invented in the 1980s, and is very popular with organic coffee producers. So I bring you to Ludwig Roselius. In the early 1900s, this guy accidentally discovered how to decaffeinate coffee. He was a coffee merchant who realized after his batch of green coffee beans had been soaked in salt water that they actually had less caffeine but still retained some of the flavor. So he invented a process using salt water to pour the beans in and then benzene to extract the caffeine. And that worked, until they discovered that benzene was cancerous, so on to new methods. The water method. In this method, green coffee beans are soaked in almost boiling water. Caffeine is water soluble, so this allows the caffeine to be extracted into the water out of the coffee bean, but unfortunately, it also has a bunch of flavor components that are also water soluble. So after this green coffee bean has been put in the water, and this caffeine and flavor molecules have been extracted, this solution is called the green coffee extract. This extract is then put through charcoal, which is usually treated with some type of carbohydrate like sucralose to help it better bind to caffeine. So, yes, this method extracts 94 to 96% of caffeine. So now on to the first solvent method, the indirect method. It starts using the water method, soaking the green beans in the water, and then it moves on to actually taking this water solution and you add the solvent to it. The solvent has been known to better attach to caffeine selectively compared to charcoal, which kind of leaves the flavor molecules able to go back into the coffee bean. Once this green coffee extract has been processed with the solvent, the flavorful water is then added back to the green coffee bean so it can diffuse back in through the process of equilibrium. You also have the direct solvent method. The way this differs is that instead of being soaked with water at first, the green coffee beans are just steamed for 30 minutes. This brings the caffeine to the surface of the bean, and then the solvent is added directly to the bean and mixed for about 10 hours. Usually in batch processing, it takes a few batches to get the caffeine out. And then the coffee beans are steamed to remove any residual solvent residue. On to the Swiss water method, popular with natural nature lovers because doesn't use any chemicals except for water. And it's been known to be better than the water method because, well, let me explain. The green coffee beans are soaked in the water, same as normal. This extracts the caffeine and the flavor. Then those initial green coffee beans are thrown away, thrown out, not useful anymore. And the water solution is passed through a filter to remove the caffeine, usually charcoal. Then you take a new batch of green coffee beans, and they're passed through this green coffee extract, where caffeine is removed but none of the flavors are lost. So, and this green coffee extract can be reused up to 10 times. Now, the downside to this method is that you have to throw away one batch of coffee for every 10 batches of decaf, which isn't very cost effective at all. It's usually popular with small organic coffee growers that are very interested in keeping the flavor of the coffee, but don't have to worry about costs because of their clientele. Then we have supercritical CO2. Now this is actually one of my favorite methods because it uses the fact that CO2 is naturally abundant and the fact that it has a low critical point, which means that it can easily become a supercritical fluid. The great thing about supercritical fluids is that they behave like a liquid, but they have the viscosity of a gas, which means that it doesn't really require a lot of effort to pump the CO2 in. Now I included a little visual to help understand this process. High pressurized CO2, usually 250 to 300 times atmospheric pressure, is added to the extraction vessel here on the left that contains pre-soaked green coffee beans. CO2 naturally selectively selects the caffeine because they're small nonpolar molecules and the large flavor molecules are not affected. After that, the CO2 containing the caffeine moves to the absorption chamber on the right, where the caffeine is extracted through methods of either water or activated charcoal. And then this CO2 gas is then recycled and used again. Now, the unfortunate thing about this is that there's very high capital costs, so it's only really good for large quantities. Not a lot of people in the industry use this today, but it does have one of the highest extraction rates out of all the methods I mentioned. This is a little table of some of the compounds that could be found inside coffee. There's a lot. So, what does the future hold? Problems with decaffeinated coffee today is that, customers say that it doesn't really have the same flavor as regular coffee. Maybe, through all these methods of putting the coffee bean in water and then taking the water out and taking the caffeine out and then putting the water back in, doesn't necessarily uphold the integrity of the bean. So, what does the world of engineering have to bring us next? Genetics. Through, creating a coffee plant that naturally does not have caffeine. Actually, researchers in Japan have already isolated the enzyme responsible for caffeine synthesis in the Coffea genus, so we might be closer than we thought. And coffee can keep on impacting society every day. Thank you. Here are my sources.
Boom.